Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and hello, World Congress on the family. We are grateful to God for you. My assignment today is to speak to you just briefly about the important subject of religious liberty. I have chosen to call it the sacred temple of the soul. In the cool of the rain-swept evening of December the 18th, 1951, the scene unfolding in Wuchao, China, while poignant, has 1,000 repetitions over hundreds of years of human history. Dr. William L. Wallace, 43-year-old physician, made his final rounds in his missionary hospital, caring for a young communist soldier who had to have an emergency appendectomy, as well as numerous other patients had drained him of all of his energy. Still, he persevered because these lives were dependent upon his faithfulness. Finally, reaching his diminutive room in the compound, he enjoyed a glass of milk and a few pieces of bread and was asleep by the time his head hit the pillow. About 3 a.m. in the morning, he was rudely awakened by Marxist soldiers who clambered into the hospital. Accused of spying for the U.S. government, Wallace was hauled away to prison. His already thin frame grew gaunt as he survived virtually on food scraps for a number of weeks. Interrogated daily, he continued to insist that while he hailed from America, he was in China on a healing mission in the name of Jesus. With growing agitation, the soldiers began to torture the missionary doctor who had healed so many. Finally, in the shadows of the darkening night, jabbing sharpened poles through the bars, the guards pummeled him to death. At great personal risk, the grateful Chinese of Wuchao erected a tombstone over his lonely grave. When Bill Wallace made the decision to remain at his post, he was fully cognizant of the dangers he faced. The physical and spiritual needs of the Chinese people, however, were more important than his own safety. Wallace was fortified with the courage that was generated by a deeply held conviction that religious liberty was the foundational right of all and must be respected by all. Today, the blood of thousands of martyrs calls out to all of us, quote, "Do not squander the greatest and most costly gift bequeathed to you by the founders of this nation," end of quote. In the confusing malaise of the contemporary social and political scene, simplistic definitions of religious liberty seem no longer to be applicable. How shall this legacy from heaven be described for a postmodern audience? And how important is it that this first freedom be retained? And if it is essential that retention is on the agenda for our republic, how shall we strive to attain it? And how exactly is the future of the family determined by this freedom? The first mandatory theological assertion, that is, the origin of freedom of faith, is an extension of the nature and the purpose of the Creator. The eternal sovereign of the universe could certainly have created automatons if he had desired. But our progenitors were created with freedom to choose to reject God or to honor him. Even the most adamant among us concerning the decrees of God will grant that Adam was free to make this choice before the fall. We can conclude that at least a portion of what it means to be made in the imago Dei, in the image of God, is that each individual has the power and responsibility of being a religiously self-determining agent, just as God is. Well, the opportunity to exercise religious choice belongs then to the nature and the purpose of God. Although there are ultimate, serious, and eternal consequences to the choices that we make, and although God fully warns of these, yet he does not coerce the worship of himself. And if God does not constrict human freedom at this point, who in the name of all that is holy can afford to do so? How then can soul liberty adequately be defined? Our American founding fathers knew that government was ordained of God. but they also realized that there were limits to what government can accomplish. Furthermore, they knew by cruel experience that government could, in fact, be dangerous. Yet when practiced as in a utilitarian fashion, its major purpose should be to restrict and punish evil and hurtful actions, and to reward those acts that are good and for the social establishment. Consequently, the powers of government over the souls of men were circumscribed in the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. Please listen carefully to what that First Amendment says. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Two prohibitions are delivered to the lawmakers. Congress is to make no religion as a state religion, and Congress will do nothing to limit the free exercise of religion. A few robed lawyers claiming to be the Supreme Court of the United States of America has no right to act in such a way as to restrict our freedom of religion. So, if Congress is thus constrained, I take it that no parts of the executive or judiciary branches of government are to function in any other fashion. Should there arise, for example, a faith that exacted human tribute for sacrifice, the government would be compelled, would have compelling interest to resist and eliminate this threat to its citizens. But if an expression of religious devotion does not physically threaten the well-being and the freedom of the people, then government is to allow that expression of faith, or, for that matter, the absence of faith. Certainly the clash of multiplying ideas and perspectives and cultures and ethnicities has complicated the issue of religious liberty across the globe. But, for example, religious tests for public office are excluded in America. But if a situation were to occur in which a candidate for office invoked a law that clearly conflicted with the Constitution of the United States, he should not be elected to office on the basis of the fact that he could not uphold the U.S. Constitution. Regardless of complications, the free world, including the USA, must continue to insist that the hearts of men constitute a sanctuary for the living God and should never be desecrated by the imposition of government or ecclesiastical body. Humans must be free to seek God according to the dictates of their own conscience. This includes the choice of sacred literature and the weight assigned to such writings. In America, candidates for public office and for all levels of the judiciary must be vetted in advance to determine the level of their determination actively to support the Constitution of the United States. Those concerned for the future of the family can no longer lend support to any candidate or judge who fails to demonstrate the most vigorous solidarity with the First Amendment to the Constitution. Around the world, governments, social agencies, and schools should invade our sacred precincts of the home, seeking to impose restrictions on religious freedoms. For the sake of God's first institution, the home, all such must be resisted. Such a concept has proven elusive in the world order. Consider this affirmation of the United Nations, provided in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18. Quote, "Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom," now I want you to get this, freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others and in public and in private to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. End of quote. Now, this remarkably explicit statement of freedom of faith includes the right of all people to the freedom of thought, conscience, religion, in public or in private, and also the right of every individual to change his faith or religion as he wishes. Yet in a significant number of countries, yes, even in an alarming number of participating and influential United Nations countries, this article is totally ignored with no consequences from the United Nations. The determination of the United Nations to ignore its own covenant makes it difficult to assign serious intent to that body of nations. In fairness, it should be pointed out that the document is not binding on the UN members, but the document, when adopted in 1948, certainly represented the sentiments of most of the world. Most reprehensible of all abuses of religious liberty are those perpetrated in the name of deity, whether at the hands of Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims, or any others. The use of coercion in matters of faith is nothing less than a violation of the human soul. Jesus established the appropriate means of discussion of religious ideas by depending upon verbal persuasion, logic, and keen theological insight, but never on force, as recorded in the New Testament documents. A thorough doctrine of religious liberty is also essential to the family. Parents must have freedom without coercion to rear their children as they wish, teaching the elements of their most cherished faith. Schools and even universities must resist the temptation to force on students conclusions that violate the convictions of these young people. This is especially true of the soft sciences and of the non-demonstrable theories of some scientific proposals. Liberty of conscience recognizes the responsibility of government to intervene in cases of imposed physical danger or abuse. Otherwise, freedom of religion entails the right, both privately and publicly, to practice one's faith free from government intrusion. This freedom extends to the open marketplace of ideas, the guarantee that there may be discussed candidly, and that these may be discussed candidly, and that being convinced of a superior faith, one may change his faith anywhere at any time. On March 15, 2004, my student, David McDonald, and his wife were headed back to their home in Mosul, Iraq. The long and exhausting day was spent finding fresh water resources for their beloved people in the country of Iraq. On the outskirts of Mosul, there was a sudden traffic jam. Too late, they realized that it was a concocted traffic imbroglio. A car with windows down pulled to a stop beside them. 2 AK-47s poured withering fire into their conveyance. An RPG fired a grenade into the window. How anyone survived is still a mystery. Mac's wife was shot completely to pieces. Somehow he got out of the car, extracted her, noted that 3 of the other friends were dead already, hailed a passing Good Samaritan cab, and somehow got his wife to the Army hospital. While badly wounded, with months of recuperation, miraculously she survived. Mac looked better when he arrived at the hospital, but while in surgery, he died on the operating table from 2 bullets to the liver. Later, I stood on a windswept, cold plains of Colorado with Mac's family and about 100 other mourners. His wife could not attend because she was still in a coma in the hospital. My wife stood by my side, quietly weeping. In the background were the Sangre de Cristo mountains. As I looked at them, the setting sun made them glow red, doubtless giving them their name. Mac was brilliant. He could have succeeded at almost anything. He had become so fluent in Arabic that one Iraqi told me that he could not tell upon hearing his voice on the phone that Mac was not native born. He had gone to Iraq, not yet 40 years of age, to minister to hurting people. He never fired a shot at a soul, and he did nothing but good, often even for the enemy. As I shivered in that cold afternoon air, I looked heavenward, and I knew that Mac's body was confined for the time to the casket, but I also knew that Mac was in heaven. He had made the ultimate sacrifice, and I owed him a couple of promises. One of those promises was that I would spend the rest of my life fighting for the freedom of all men, to have the freedom of conscience and religious practice. Because without that freedom, all other freedoms become relatively meaningless. Will you join me in doing whatever is necessary to maintain this country, the United States of America, and as many others as will join us in this world, so that men and women are able to witness to the world that we are free indeed? Thank you.